The Weight of the Hatchet. The news reached the Teft lands in a whisper, but it hit the Narragansett village like a physical blow. Young Canonchit was sitting by the water, trying to carve a whistle from a reed, when he saw the runners approaching. He saw the way they stumbled, their faces painted with the black soot of mourning. He didn't need to hear the words. He felt the world tilt. His mother, Wawalome, found him by the shore. She didn't offer the comfort of a hug. She offered the comfort of a mission. She knelt in the sand, her face a mask of grief and fury. "They used the Mohegan's hand," she whispered, her voice like the grinding of stones. "But the mind was English. They feared your father because he spoke of a day when the tribes would be one. They killed him because he would not bow." Canonchit looked at his carving, the small, fragile reed. He snapped it in his hands. From that day on, he stopped being a child. He watched his uncle Pesicus take the mantle of sachem, watching as the English demanded bags of wampum as payment for the very war that killed his father. It was a slow, grinding humiliation. Years later, when a teenage Joshua Teft found Canonchit in the woods, he saw a young man who carried a mountain of silence. "My father died with his hands tied," Canonchit told Joshua one evening, as they sat near the hidden grove where his young cousin, known as Steady Gaze, was gathering roots. "The English call it justice, call it a hunt. They hunt the spirit of a man until they can trap it in their laws." Joshua, who had felt the weight of his own family's rigid expectations, looked at his friend. "Then we live outside their laws," Joshua said. "We build our own walls." Canonchit looked at the English boy, then at his cousin's Steady Gaze, who was giggling at the way a squirrel chattered above them. He realized then that his father's dream of a united people hadn't died on Sachem's plain. It was living here, in this small, renegade circle. He had lost a father to an English betrayal, but in the woods of Rhode Island, he was finding a brother in a Teft and a future in a Wampanoag family. The hatchet that killed Mayantanamo had intended to end the Narragansett line, but instead, it had sharpened the resolve of the son who would eventually lead them all. The village of the White Cedar. Steady Gaze was born in a village near the eastern shores, where the air always tasted of salt and the sound of the Atlantic was the heartbeat of her world. To her people, she was named for the light that hits the water just before a storm. Her earliest memories were of the Mizhoon dugout canoe. Her father, a respected fisherman, would place her in the center of the cedar boat, and she would watch his powerful shoulders move in rhythm as they glided through the marshes. She learned that the world was not something to be owned, but a series of gifts. The spring run of the herring, the summer ripening of the strawberries, and the autumn harvest of the three sisters, corn, beans, and squash. While the men were at sea or in the forest, Steady Gaze's childhood was shaped by the women of the longhouse. She spent her days at her mother's side, her small fingers learning to weave the waterproof mats of cattail and bulrush. "Listen to the fire," her mother would say as they worked. "It tells the stories of those who came before. If you keep the hearth, you keep the people." Steady Gaze was a child of the woods. She knew which moss grew on the north side of the trees and which roots could settle a fever. She was the girl who would wander a little too far into the thickets, not out of defiance, but out of a deep, quiet curiosity. It was during these wanderings that she first learned the silence, the ability to move through the brush without snapping a twig, a skill that would one day save her life on the dangerous roads of Rhode Island. The danger in Steady Gaze's childhood didn't come from the forest. It came from the edges of it. She remembered the first time she saw an English settlement. She was 6 years old, clinging to her mother's hand as they went to trade furs for metal needles. She saw the fenced people. To a Wampanoag child, the English were strange and rigid. They wore heavy, hot clothes even in the sun. They cut down the ancient oaks not just for wood, but to make the land flat. She remembered the smell of their cattle, a heavy, musky scent that drowned out the smell of the pine needles. "Why do they tie the land down with stones?" she asked her father that night. He didn't answer for a long time. He just looked at the moon. "Because they are afraid it will run away from them," he finally said. "They do not know that the land is the one who holds us." The true end of her childhood came with the Troubles. As the English of Plymouth Colony pushed further west, her village found itself caught in a vice of land deeds and court summons. Disease, brought by the fenced people, took her younger brother and weakened the village's strength. When the tensions grew too high, her family made the difficult choice to seek sanctuary with their powerful cousins to the west, the Narragansett. The journey was long and full of shadows. Now a young girl on the verge of womanhood carried the family's most precious woven baskets. She looked back at the ocean one last time, realizing that the world of her birth was being swallowed by the order of the newcomers. As the three young people sat together, the fire in the center of the longhouse was dying down to a pulsing, rhythmic orange, casting a glow that made the tattoos on Canonchit's arms look like shifting shadows. Joshua Teft sat across from him, his English wool coat discarded, feeling the cool night air of the swamp pressing against the cedar bark walls. They had been speaking of stone, how the English piled it high to make walls, and how the Narragansett used it to grind corn. But then, the conversation drifted to the weight of a man's legacy. "Your people have many books, Joshua," Canonchit began, his voice a low, melodic rasp. "They write down their laws so they can point to them when they take a man's life. My father, Myantonimo, believed those laws were a bridge. He thought the word of an Englishman was as solid as the granite in these hills." Canonchit picked up a small, charred piece of wood from the edge of the hearth. "In 1643, when I was but a boy the height of your belt, my father went to war with the Mohegans. He wore a heavy iron coat, a gift from the men of Newport. He thought it was a sign of friendship, a shell that would make him a god of the woods." He looked at Joshua, his eyes hard and unblinking. But that iron was a trap, made him slow. When he stumbled on the plains near the Shetucket River, he was not taken by a better warrior. He was taken because he tried to carry the weight of your world on his back. "The Mohegans did not strike him," Canonchit continued. "They knew he was a prize. They turned him over to the commissioners in Hartford. For weeks, my father sat in a dark room, waiting for Roger Williams, the man he had fed, the man he had given land, to speak for him. But Williams was one voice, and the elders in Boston and Connecticut were many." Canonchit leaned forward, the firelight catching the sharp line of his jaw. "The English judges held a secret council. They said they had no law to kill a king who was not theirs. So they made a new law. They decided that Uncas, the Mohegan, should be the hand, while they remained the heart. They marched him out into the forest, Joshua. An English guard walked behind him to make sure the justice was finished. They walked him to a place called Sachem's Plain. My father did not beg. He did not look back. He walked with the dignity of a man who knew he was being betrayed by the very civilization he had tried to join. Suddenly, Uncas's brother stepped from behind a tree. With one blow of a hatchet to the head, the light of the Narragansett was extinguished. The silence in the longhouse became absolute. Joshua felt a coldness in his chest that the fire couldn't reach. He realized that every time he had seen Canonchit look toward the English settlements with a hard heart, he was seeing the ghost of that hatchet blow. "They didn't pull the trigger," Canonchit whispered, "but they gave the command. They used a native hand to do an English deed. And then they demanded we pay them in wampum for the cost of the war that killed him." Joshua reached out, his hand hovering near the fire. "I was a child then, too, Canonchit. My father—" He spoke of Myantonimo with respect. "He said the colonies grew dark the day he died." Canonchit reached across the hearth and gripped Joshua's forearm. His grip was like iron. "That is why I brought you here. That is why I bring my young cousin. You are a Teft, but you have the spirit of the renegade. You saw the fences of your people and you climbed over them." He looked toward the doorway, where the mist of the great swamp was rolling in. "My father died trying to build a bridge with gifts. We will build ours with truth. When the English come with their fire and their muskets, and they will come, you will not be standing behind their stone walls. You will be standing with the son of the king they betrayed." In that moment, the story of the father became the oath of the son. Joshua didn't just understand the history. He felt the weight of the hatchet himself, and he knew that from that night on, there was no going back to the world of fences. Mary made sure the story would line the pages of her journal for future generations to read.
In the shadow of the cedar, where the embers softly glow, a story of a father's end began to softly flow. Canonchit sat with shoulders broad, a prince of grief and pride, with Joshua, the English youth, attentive at his side. Between them lay a hatchet's weight, a history of pain, of promises like autumn mist and blood upon the plain. My father sought a bridge, he said, his voice a steady thrum, to make the two worlds beat as one, like cadence on a drum. He wore a coat of English mail, a gift of iron grace, but heavy was the civilized that slowed his weary pace. When stumbling on the Mohegan field, the armor held him fast, a prisoner of a foreign gift. His freedom could not last. They took him to the Hartford halls, to judges in their gowns, who weighed a king against their greed and feared his ancient crowns. They had no law to take his life, so they devised a lie and gave the Mohegan the hand to watch my father die. With an English guard behind his back, they marched him to the wood and watched the blade of Uncas strike where once a giant stood. The fire popped, a sudden spark, a jagged, orange light. As Joshua felt the freezing chill of that historic night, he saw the face of my Antonimo, dignified and still, a victim of a justice shaped by a colonial will. The hatchet fell on Sachem's plain, but echoes traveled far, to burn within his son's dark eyes like an unyielding star. They used a native hand, he whispered, for an English deed, to plant the fences in the earth and sow their bitter seed. But you, he turned to Joshua, a grip upon his arm, you left the stone-walled villages and the safety of the farm. You chose the steady gaze of one who knows the forest floor and walked through every open gate and every closing door. So in the great swamp's hidden heart, the bond was forged in flame between the son who lost a king and the youth who changed his name. The history of the hatchet's blow was shared between the two, as ancient grief and rebel love began to bloom anew. For though the father died in chains, the son had found a brother, bound by the truth of what was lost and found in one another.